Again, I want to welcome you all to tonight's statewide election funding advocacy training for fiscal year 2024 to 2025, sponsored by the North Carolina Black Alliance, the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center, Common Cause North Carolina, Democracy North Carolina, and the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. Ourselves. I am Tyler Day. I'm the Policy and Civic Engagement Manager with Common Cause North Carolina. And I will pass it on to Keith.
Hi, everybody. I'm Keith Chappelle, pronouns he, him, his, and I'm a program associate on the policy team at Democracy North Carolina. And I will pass it on to Adrienne.
Hi, everybody. I'm Adrienne. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a voting rights legal fellow at Southern Coalition for Social Justice. And I will pass it on to Cassandra.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Cassandra Stokes, Democracy and Economy Associate with NC Black Alliance. I'm hailing all the way, bringing you greetings from Durham, North Carolina. I will go Bull City, right? Okay, so I will pass it over to Carol if she has not went yet.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carol Moreno, Policy and Programs Manager at MNC, and I'll throw it over to Ann Webb.
I'm the Policy Director at Common Cause NC. I use she, her pronouns. And you'll have to tell me if there's anyone else.
Thank you, though.
I think Caitlin.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Caitlin Kaiser. My pronouns are she and her. I am the policy director at Democracy North Carolina. I thank you all for being here, and I'm going to pass it back to Tyler.
All right. Thanks to everyone. So in 2024, during this fiscal year, our 5 organizations are currently partnering to monitor election budgets and advocate for funding in this critical election year. Our staff and volunteer County Board of Elections monitors are also gathering information about election budgets being considered statewide. So no matter where you live, all 100 counties are currently discussing, debating, and in some cases deciding how your elections will be funded this year and next. So tonight's 75-minute training has a few specific goals to provide you with important information around 5 key areas: why your election budget matters, an understanding of the election funding process in North Carolina, ways you make a difference in your county's election budget, providing tools, resources, and next steps for election funding advocacy. We've got a lot of great resources for you. And we want to also be able to answer any questions that you have. So we will have a Q&A section at the end. And to that point, as we discuss these important areas, attorneys from SCSJ and policy experts from Common Cause North Carolina and Democracy North Carolina will be in the chat throughout tonight's training to answer your questions. So we did want to know, and feel free to put in the chat, what brought you to this training? The purpose of the training and why elections funding is so important. I am going to turn it over to Keith.
All right. Thank you, Tyler. So before we talk about the elections funding process and how you can advocate, it's important to ground us and you in why this work is so important, especially now in 2024. So the budgets approved by county commissioners this year will determine the resources counties will have to administer in the 2024 general elections. And election funding advocacy is needed now more than ever to make sure there is proper election investment for the important cycles to come. So what are some of the reasons why it's so critical this year? Well, first, the State Board of Elections is underfunded. Second, recent election law changes and a more contentious political environment have put a greater burden on the county boards. And this includes the implementation of the voter ID law, new reports due to the state board, and other changes. And also, election funding is linked to turnout. Our research shows, on average, there is a correlation between the amount a county spent on elections per voter and 2022 voter turnout. So what makes 2024 different? Well, as I said, the North Carolina State Board of Elections is underfunded and it is a smaller agency. And if you don't know, the State Board of Elections is North Carolina state agency charged with the administration of the elections process. And the state board oversees the 100 county board of elections in North Carolina. And despite North Carolina's continued rapid population growth and an increased number of registered voters, the state board has been forced to downsize since 2020 because it has not received the funding it needs. And because of a lack of funding because of a lack of funding from the North Carolina state legislature, the state board is a smaller agency. And at the state board's winter conference this past February, the agency provided an update on its operating status. In 2020, the state board had a field support team of 8. That's down to 6 in 2024. Also in 2020, the state board had a larger data team to provide elections data and fulfill public records requests. State board support staff are especially important now for smaller counties with fewer election staff. In some counties, the county elections director is the only full-time staff person. And it's critical that the state legislature increases funding for the state board. If they don't, the state board will have less capacity to support the county boards during the general election and onward. And the State Board of Elections has asked for funding to secure elections by investing in information technology software and services and funding for critical IT positions, supporting counties by providing funding for 2 additional regional election field support specialists, returning to the number they had in 2020, continued investment in modernizing the statewide election management system, and improving data analytics to build on existing list maintenance programs. So please contact your state legislators and encourage them to provide the state board with the funding they've requested. You can find your legislator, and I'm going to drop this link in the chat for you right now, but this is where you can find them to contact them. There are also a number of new regulations in place for 2024, which will affect election officials. And to talk about that, I'll turn it over to Adrienne.
Thanks so much, Keith. So this year, on top of it being a presidential election year, there are several changes that are going to impose more duties on election boards and staff and make adequate funding all the more critical. So the big one is voter ID. So for the 2024 general election, that's going to be the first time for many voters having to show photo voter ID. If they didn't vote in the municipals or they didn't vote in the primaries, this might be their first time seeing it. And that new voter photo ID implementation is creating additional steps that the county board of elections has to take to handle scale. The thing is, they're responsible for doing include reviewing photocopied ID. I might be breaking up a little bit, so I'll do my best to push through it, but I'm going to try turning my video off and see if that helps. How's this? Is this any better?
You're coming in better.
Awesome. Okay, then I will keep video off. Just pretend you see me. So county boards of elections are going to have to be reviewing photocopied IDs to make sure that those are valid. They're going to have to be reviewing additional provisional ballots for voters who didn't show ID at the polls or didn't send in a photocopy of their ID, and provided an ID exception form. They're going to have to be checking IDs for people who choose to come to the County Board of Elections office later and show their IDs in place of doing that in person. And they're also going to have to educate the public on this voter ID requirement. That could look like seminars, holding voter ID drives at various events to make sure that people are able to get access to free IDs, providing handouts and other educational tools to make sure that folks are aware. Additionally, there's a new voter registration form requirement. In December of 2023, the State Board of Elections started requiring voters to put the last 4 digits of their Social Security number or their driver's license number, if they have either, when they're registering to vote. If this information isn't provided by the voter, then the county board has to contact those voters, adding more workload for staff. Additionally, there was a bill passed last fall, Senate Bill 747, that created a series of reports that the county boards of elections are required to make to the State Board of Elections during early voting, on election day, and after the election. Once again, theme of the day, this is going to require additional staff time and additional training. For just a quick overview of what those reports look like, for each day of the early voting period, have to provide a report of the number of mail-in absentee ballots that have been spoiled, where the voter had requested an absentee ballot but then shows up to vote in person. And then the number of outstanding absentee ballots, including the total number of mail-in ballots sent out to date, and the total number that have been received. Then after that, on the day after the day of the election, they also have to send in a report with the number of mail-in absentee ballots that have been counted, the number of outstanding mail-in absentee ballots, once again, the total that they've sent out, and the total number that they've received, and the number of provisional ballots cast. So all in all, county boards always have a lot to do, but they have even more to do in this very important election. So to talk more about what county election directors are saying their biggest priorities for funding are, I'll pass it back to Keith.
Thanks, Adrian. So based upon our contacts with County Board of Elections directors across the state this year, some of their most important needs include funding for training and hiring additional poll workers. According to a recent City View magazine article, Cumberland County is 550 poll workers short of the staff it needs to run this year's elections, or this year's November elections. County Board of Elections also need to hire additional election specialists. Counties may require or need additional staff to handle increased workloads based on all the election law changes mentioned earlier. Counties also need staff pay increases. According to research by the News and Observer this year, 9 county election directors are compensated below the living income standard for their county. This includes Chowan, Currituck, Gates, Graham, Hyde, Madison, Perquimans, Carroll, and Washington counties. And lastly, County Board of Elections need supplies and equipment, including laptops, printers, ballot supplies, postage, and data equipment to carry out the duties of their office and elections. Also, in a report released by Southern Coalition for Social Justice last year, one elections director said, "You talk to a lot of counties in Eastern North Carolina, they're fighting over the needs. They can get it, but it's a constant fight. They're not fighting over new office furniture. They're fighting over how many absentee envelopes they can order." In addition, State Board of Elections Director Karen Brinson Bell told the legislature last month, as we go into the general election, when we have a population of folks who very often do not vote except for a presidential general election, we know we're going to need to reach a much broader, larger volume of individuals to make sure they're informed. Now, we've talked about some of the changes election officials will have to navigate this year. Many of these officials are new to their roles, as there has been a lot of election director turnover throughout the past few years. And I'll pass it over to Cassandra, who will tell us more about that.
Thanks, Keith. Good evening, everyone. So to dig into that a little bit further, there have been approximately 60 changes in our county election directors in North Carolina since 2019. Some counties are on their 3rd elections director since 2019. And out of those, 60 changes, 37 have retired, 21 resigned, 1 passed away, and 1 was let go. The majority of these directors surveyed stated that pay raises and additional staff support were policies that would encourage them to remain in their positions. So in 2024, at least 28 county board of elections directors will be serving in their first presidential election. So when speaking before members of the state legislature last month, the State Board of Elections Director Karen Brinson Bell explained that for many of these directors, the fuel is just not in the tank anymore. She said that elected officials have faced hostility, they faced harassment and substantial changes in their workload, and this has led to many directors to retire earlier than anticipated or planned. So Director Bell basically explained that because of this, there is definitely a need for increased support from our state board. And to talk about that relationship between funding and turnout, I'll pass it back over to Tyler.
Thank you, Cassandra. So lastly, we want to talk about elections funding and turnout. And last year, we looked at the voter turnout in the 2022 midterm elections, and we looked at how much counties spent per voter. And so what you're seeing is a graph that shows voter turnout, and then also the amount that each county spent per voter minus the national average. So each of those dots represents a county, and any of the dots you see there below 0 means that they were under the national average. So a majority of the counties studied in North Carolina, there were 83 counties that were a part of this study. They were 80, and the majority of them were below the national average. But if you look at this, you can see that as turnout increases, the amount spent per voter increases. There's a line that is trending upward. So that would indicate that there was a correlation, at least in 2022, when it came to the amount that counties spent on elections and their voter turnout in 2022. And so I did want to highlight Onslow County in particular. So Onslow had the lowest turnout in 2022, and you can see it represented here. You have the arrow on your screen. And they also spent the least amount of money on elections per voter out of those 83 counties that were studied. A report from the Southern Coalition for Social Justice noted that Onslow had among the highest differences between the requested and approved budgets across the 6 fiscal years studied in their report, and we'll share a link to that report later on. That looked at elections funding from previous years. Onslow is one of the fastest growing counties in the state, as well as it ranks 13th in population, or it did 13th in population growth between 2010 and 2020. And I know that our organizations focused a lot on Onslow last year to advocate for better funding for the Board of Elections. There were local advocates that went to the county commission public hearing and encouraged them to increase funding. And thankfully, they did. And they actually increased it by more than 100,000 than the previous year. And I wanted to point this out because I think it shows that, the work that we're going to be doing here, raising our voices, attending these public hearings, contacting your county commissioners, and talking about the need to adequately fund our elections can make a real difference. We're going to talk more about how you can get involved later on, but I do want to welcome a special guest that we have to talk more about their experience and that is the Director of the Onslow County Board of Elections, Jason Dedmont. I think we can get the spotlight set up, but Jason, are you with us?
Can you hear me, Tyler?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, it must not be working on my cell phone. I'm fighting between my cell phone and the computer, so I guess I should leave the cell phone alone.
Yes, so yeah, we can hear you loud and clear now. Thank you again so much for being willing to join us. I did want to ask you because, as I said just a moment ago, Onslow has not received adequate funding for its elections in the past, and I wanted to know what type of impact that has on the Board of Elections.
I believe it has a major impact. I started May 28th of 2019. This current election is my 10th election. So I have been through actual special election, runoffs, presidential, midterm, municipal, all different types of elections. And I was so glad that you pointed out, or the budget and tax place did an article on me, and then you followed up because I was actually being accused of spending too much money by the previous county manager when I noticed the article that we were the least funded per registered voter. When I took this job, they had 97,000 registered voters, and now we have 127,000 registered voters, and I still only have 5 full-time staff, including myself. Brunswick County is similar in size and number of registered voters. They have 8 full-time staff, and they're trying to get a 9th. So I currently am hiring my 5th staff member. I'm down to just 4, including myself right now, and I have asked, trying to get the ability to hire 2 people out of this round of interviews. But I definitely think there is a correlation between based on everything you provided, money spent and votes. And I majored in psychology in college, so I know correlation doesn't equal causation, but I definitely think that is one of our struggles. We do have a new county manager, so I don't want to saddle him with what's happened in the past, and I'm hopeful that we're turning a new corner. But if things don't work out in my budget this year, I have lots of people in my corner, you, and then I have some people from the A. Philip Randolph. And I'd like to just thank all of y'all. It was a bumpy ride. I ended up getting a letter from the commissioners stating that the consensus of them was to it didn't exactly say remove me, but it's kind of getting into that. But my board did not oblige. What I did was I called into a radio show and basically called out the county manager for rolling her eyes at us 3 times, not taking us serious, saying we only work 2 days a year, and it was just really embarrassing. And those 2 commissioners were on a radio show that morning, and they were speaking about it. So I called in and defended my department. And I would say between the old county manager and the old county attorney, which is interesting, she left the county and now is a partner at his firm, and they went to law school together. But I think they corroborated trying to get me fired. But I'm still here, and so I'm leery to speak out because they come after you when you speak out. But I would like to think if I follow the rules, laws, and regulations, and I don't do anything illegal, unethical, and immoral, don't think I should be penalized for speaking the truth.
Yes, and I want to second what Caitlin said in the chat. We thank you for your dedication to voters in Onslow County. and really fighting for them. I mean, advocating for this funding is fighting for the voters of the county, essentially. Um, so I did want to ask you about the impact that the new election laws. We talked about that earlier. Of course, there's a voter ID law now, and there were new regulations put in place from Senate Bill 747, the elections omnibus bill that passed last year. So I wanted to know, from your perspective, how this is going to impact the work and the workload of the county boards of elections.
Yeah, so one of the things that was interesting is in 2020, I actually got funding from Arnold Schwarzenegger. USC just did a small one-page Word document, and I was able to get $40,000 for my county. It was supposed to fund about 10 different things I needed, but the county stepped in and wanted me to use that for poll worker pay. So I reached back out to USC, and they let me use it for poll worker pay. But then I kind of got in trouble for asking for that grant because I didn't get permission from the county manager first, which I didn't know because the State Board of Elections had told us to do it. So I did it, and it's kind of a catch-22 in that situation. Um, I'm sorry. I meant to answer your question, but I went down one road. Can you repeat it again? That way I can focus back in. I've
No,
been
no.
tomorrow's election day, so I've been getting 24 cages out and also dealing with 24 chief judges, getting them to set up sites. So my brain's a little bit all over the place right now.
No worries at all. And I think you actually did answer part of it. But my question was about the impact that the new election laws, voter ID, Senate Bill 747 would have on your work and the workload of the
Oh, got
county.
it. Got it. Thank you. So based on your study, we get $5 and some change per registered voter that year. And with the state not funding the voter ID, I think we've broke it down that it could eventually cost us $4 and some change to make a voter ID. So basically, all of our funding will go to making IDs if everyone demanded a voter ID, because not everyone needs a voter ID. There's some misinformation about that. You only need a voter ID if you don't have another form of ID that's acceptable. But if you ask for a voter ID and you want one, I can't deny it. So it's kind of hard working with the budgets we have. If you're going to implement a law that you have to have an ID, then you should have to fund what you're implementing. So much like our department, we're an unfunded mandate to the county, then the voter ID law is an unfunded mandate added on to an unfunded mandated department. So we're already stressed financially, and then you add more financial stress, and then you take away the ability to get private funding. So it's kind of like a perfect storm.
Yes, and I do want to highlight that uh, uh, no private funding now is allowed. And you mentioned the example with the money from Arnold Schwarzenegger. So that is another change for this year. Um, and I also wanted to ask you just what is it like in a county board of elections office during a presidential election year? Um, I imagine it is extremely busy.
Absolutely. So the only presidential election I have had is the COVID presidential election pandemic. So I'm praying that this election will be a little bit easier. None of them are the same. So no matter how many elections you have, if you think you know it all, you're dead wrong. So I think it's tough enough for me. This is my second presidential, and like I said, 5 years and 15 days. If I was a brand new elections director, especially in a small county where I didn't have a supportive staff, um, gosh, I don't know how they're going to do it, honestly. I know they have the regional support. They keep changing the name of that role. Used to be called an SST. I don't know what it's really called. I just call it my regional. But they definitely need more of those. I saw you mention it went from 8 to 6. I would say 8 is not enough. There's 100 counties. I would say they need at least 10. That way each regional would work 10 counties. Um, Not only that, but you know, 127,000 voters, and it had 97 when I walked in the door. So that's 30,000 extra voters in 5 years, and then, no extra help. If I didn't love what I do and believe in the election process, honestly, I was a banker for 12 and a half years and I made much more money. So if it was just about money, I would have been long gone. And I have not received a raise in 5 years. I get COLAs that everyone in the county gets, but no raise, even though I got certified after 2 years. And it's not all about money, but with all the added pressure, if you think about it, we're HR, we're finance, we're the public information officer. We're managing this office. So we're like every department of the county in one. And then they pay us here in Onslow. I'm like $20,000 underpaid from any other director. And they think I just have a staff of 5, including myself, but we grow to 300 during an election. So this is much harder than anyone could understand. And you can't, like, I hired somebody with a political science degree, double major in political science and history, very smart fellow, but you could have a PhD in political science and you walk in this office and that is not going to help you with what I need you to do. I just hired someone, and the second person actually had a bachelor's in political science. I hated not to hire him. I'm trying to fight to get a extra spot, but this other lady had more experience with customer service and things like that. So there is no real education to get you in this job and be good at this job. I would say coming from a bank like I did, it was helpful because this is essentially a bank, except for in the vault is ballots instead of money. I would have never known how perfect the transition was, but the hurricane actually brought me here. I was out of my home for 10 months. I had Hurricane Florence and told my wife if I didn't change jobs, I was going to have a heart attack. So I came here in 2019, and then in August of 22 I had a mini stroke. So I didn't have a heart attack, but I had a mini stroke. Different kind of stress, but yeah, and they don't expect you to make any mistakes even though you're human. And it seems like they're always trying to come at you for one thing or the other. And we definitely need advocates and people coming to our meetings, going to the county commissioners, speaking about how important it is. They forget that without the elections department, there is no local county government because the county manager is hired by the commissioners and the Board of Education. They're voted on here, and they run the schools. So it's all local. And the problem is, really, we're state employees, but we're paid by the county because we report to our board and then the state. So the county feels like they have no control over us except for the money. So they don't want to give us any money till they absolutely have to. And so it's not a very good way to operate. My father is a CPA. I'm very budget conscious. And being a banker 12 and a half years, I don't waste money. I loved it when I found out that I was spending money wisely, and it was actually amazing. I was able to operate because I was being, accused of spending too much on poll worker pay, which they deserve more, in my opinion. But I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to chime in. I will say that if you don't hear from people like me, it's because they're afraid of losing their jobs. I have taken blows over speaking, and I'm sure it will continue. But I'm not saying anything partisan. I've been unaffiliated since 2004. I love the process. I keep my views to myself, and I vote for the person, not the party. And I was born in Onslow County. This is my home county. So I have nothing but good intentions for this county, and I don't want an exorbitant pay, but I think myself and my people deserve equal pay.
Well, I know the State Board of Elections director said when she was speaking with lawmakers last month, it's as critical to keep us operational as it is our power plants or our water system. So we should fund elections with that recognition. And I couldn't agree more with her. And I thank you so much, Jason. I know it is election eve because we've got a second primary tomorrow. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. And I know it's been very insightful for me as well as everyone who has joined. So thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, and if that's going to be it for me, I just wanted to say one last thing to everyone, if I could.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I just wanted to thank you for having the opportunity to speak. And if you reach out to any directors and it seems like they're brushing you off, they're not returning your emails, they're not returning your phone calls. Number one, they're very busy. Number two, they're understaffed. And number three, they're afraid for their jobs if they speak out to you. So they're all good people. They just, I don't know, maybe I'm stupid, maybe I'm crazy, but I believe that if I'm doing the right thing and I'm following the law and I have good intentions in my heart, then if they're coming after me, well, let them come. And if I go down, at least if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And so I appreciate what y'all do. Normally I would stay for this, but I still got people calling, letting me know they're okay at their precinct and set up for tomorrow. So yeah, I just appreciate what everybody does, fighting for democracy. And I don't know everyone's budgets, but I know there's a big difference in, say, Brunswick County and our county, and they use the same equipment we do. And I love Sarah. This is nothing against Sarah. I would want to model Sarah and how she gets, um, her county to fund her properly. And she's got two deputy directors where I can't even get them to give me one with the proper title and pay. And we have a long way to go in Onslow County. I guess we're on slow, like the county says. But I really appreciate y'all letting me talk. And yeah, I hope I don't catch any backfire for this. But yeah, the truth is the truth. And I hope to have a good relationship with the county going forward. And I'm giving the new county manager a clean slate. So, everything that's happened was with the prior county manager. None of this is the current county manager, and I'm not going to hold any of that against him. And I'm hoping that this budget cycle we are funded appropriately, and everyone's waiting for me to tell them if we're not, and then they're going to go talk to the county commissioners.
Yes. Well, we hope that you're funded more than appropriately. You know, but I thank you again so much for joining us. And as Reverend Max says in the chat, the truth matters. Absolutely. So we are going to move along, and I want to turn it now to Adrian, who is going to talk more about what the election funding process looks like.
Hi again, y'all. So as we've been hearing, despite the fact that you might assume your county election board is being funded by the state with how many important things they're doing for the state, the ultimate fact is that the county commissioners are the ones who fund your elections, and your county's annual budget will include the funding for your county's board of elections. And for this year, it'll include the funding for the general election in the fall. Funding for election administration is a year-round prospect and a complex one. It doesn't happen just in a day. It requires bringing together multiple funding streams and identifying all the equipment and the personnel needed to make sure that the election runs smoothly and everyone's able to vote. Funding will allow board staff to register voters, to update voter records, maintain equipment, maintain records, conduct mail-in voting, provide accessible voting locations, and run audits. Proper funding ensures that all voters can cast a ballot and that every ballot is counted as cast. Sometime between winter of the prior year and spring of the current election year, your election budget is prepared by your county director or county manager, approved by the county board of elections, and then is integrated in whole or in part into the county's budget. And each county needs to pass their annual budget no later than July 1st. So throughout that process, there are a variety of opportunities for you to engage in the local budget process. From working with your Board of Elections director in first developing that budget, to connecting with county commissioners to ensure that they enact that budget and provide that funding. You can see on the slides right now a timeline of some key dates. So for some terminology, fiscal year is going to begin on July 1st and it ends on June 30th of the following year. So when you're hearing people talk about the budget for this upcoming election, the period beginning July 1st, 2024 and ending June 30th, 2025. You'll see it called fiscal year 2024-2025 or FY 2024-2025. And as you can see on that timeline, right around this time of year, May to June is when most counties are holding their budget hearings and working on getting a budget approved. So it's a great time for y'all to be getting involved. And I will pass it over to Cassandra.
Yep, thanks, Adrian. And as you mentioned, your county board of elections director or your county manager prepares the budget and presents that budget to the county commissioners for consideration in the first 6 months of the year. So the budget will be used to pay for things such as full-time and part-time staff, voting machines, early voting sites, supplies, updating the website, voter education resources and campaigns, more weekend voting hours during early voting, absentee ballots in envelopes, higher pay for poll workers and more poll workers, which was mentioned during the Q&A, and then ensuring all aspects of voting are ADA compliant. So all these items can definitely make a huge difference in most of our North Carolina counties, which leads us to our next question, Tyler.
Yes, so we wanted to ask you all, how could more elections funding make a difference in your county? So feel free to drop it in the chat. I see Jason says he could go on for days. Elizabeth says the number of early voting sites. I see bilingual capacity workers, absolutely. And I'm just going to say, I think additional voter education. I know some counties have some really good voter education programs. And for Forsyth County, they have an elections academy where they actually go through the process and explain to people kind of behind the scenes at the County Board of Elections into what goes on, and I think that would be helpful. Yes, I see college campus voting sites, additional security equipment, additional curbside assistance and coverage. So yeah, a lot of great reasons why we should increase funding. So I am going to turn it now over to Keith to finally talk about what you can do and how we can work together to advocate for better funding for our county boards.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. And this is always my favorite part of these trainings, because I always like letting people know what they can do and how they can advocate for their communities. So the first thing, you can do it. You can definitely do it. You want to attend County Board of Elections meetings. This is a good way for you to build relationships with your County Board of Elections director, with people like Jason, staff, and then also board members. Information for the County Board of Election meetings can be found on their websites. And then we can also send you a link where you can keep track of those County Board of Election meetings. One thing that I do want to acknowledge is that a lot of County Board of Elections have already discussed the budget on their end. So the ball is in the court of your county commissioners, and I'll talk more about that in a couple seconds. But it's always a good practice to attend County Board of Elections meetings and start to build relationships with the staff and members. The other thing you can do if you can't make County Board of Elections meetings is to give a call to your County Board of Elections director, and then also contact Board of Elections members. And when you call them, that's also another way to build a relationship with them. And then you can also ask about their budget needs and priorities. This will help you learn where your advocacy can support election funding and election administration. The other thing that you can do is ask for a copy of the budget your county board of elections requested. You can share that with us on the call, and then we can help answer any questions you have about it. The next thing you'll need to do is find when your county commissioners are having their budget public hearing. Information on this can be found on county commissioner's website, and we'll also share this resource that we have that's tracking those meeting dates. And these budget public hearings are your opportunity to give feedback and advocate for items in the budget you care about. Tyler will talk more about the resources that we'll provide, and that can help you with your talking points. It's important to remember that your county commissioners are the ones who approve the final budget, so hearing from advocates like you is crucial and very important to securing strong elections budgets. And the last thing to do is once that budget is approved, you can ask for a copy of that budget. So follow up with your county board of elections and ask for a copy of that final budget for their office. And then you can also share that with us. We can track where needs might still exist and where gaps need to be filled, where gaps were filled. And I know this can feel like a lot of information and potentially overwhelming. And I just want to let you know that everyone on this call tonight is here to help. And I encourage you to reach out to us with any questions you have. And the one thing that I always keep in mind if I feel nervous when I'm talking with public officials is I remember the civics education work that I did with 8th graders in Massachusetts and how they asked their state representative how he could not have a conflict of interest when debating affordable housing development in the state legislature since he worked in real estate. And they shared that, and he was speechless and he didn't know what to say. And so that said, I encourage you to channel the confidence of those 8th graders and know that you are an elections funding advocate. And by committing to being an elections funding advocate, you're increasing funding for your neighbors and your community ahead of the 2024 general election and local elections in 2025. So with our tools and resources, you can show the power of election funding advocacy where you live. Tyler, I'm going to pass it back to you to learn more about how we can all help.
Thank you, Keith. So there are several resources which we will share via email following this training. Unfortunately, we do not have all these materials translated at the moment. The first one I want to talk about is our 2024 Elections Funding Advocacy County Profile. This resource provides information on what election funding looks like in specific counties, and it's an excellent resource to share with your network and local officials when you advocate for elections funding. It shows recent funding amounts, comparisons to similarly sized counties, and how funding is critical to ensure accessible, safe, and fair elections. If we can go to the next slide, I believe we've got a copy of that, a blank copy, but we're going to send you, you'll have access, I know, on the Democracy North Carolina website to all of the resources for each specific county. And what you'll see is a document that looks like this. You'll see the amount that was funded for elections during the last presidential election year. It's very important that when you're advocating that you're comparing to the last presidential election year, which is fiscal year 2020 to 2021, and not just the last fiscal year, because different years, during different years you have different elections. So it's important to be using the right comparable year. And presidential years are when you have the most the most people voting, you tend to need the most amount of money. The resource will also show you the percentage share of funding in that last year of the county's general fund. So that is basically the amount of money that the county has to delegate to different departments. And what this will show is the percentage that they delegated to elections. And it will compare your county's spending rank with other similarly sized counties in terms of their general funds. Jason was talking about Brunswick before, and that's a really good comparison because Brunswick's general fund is about the same size as Onslow's, but Brunswick spent a larger percentage on elections, quite a bit more on elections. So we'll also show the amount of spending per registered voter compared with the national average, and that will be adjusted for inflation. And then you'll see some of the points we've already talked about on here for reasons why the 2024 general election, why it's important to fund this year and what is different about this year. And also information about election director pay, which we talked about earlier. And you see that link at the bottom, demnc.co/elections advocacy. We're going to be putting all the resources on that site. So it'll be your one-stop shop for all of these resources. There are a few other resources, and we're going to drop each of these in the chat. But in addition, you're going to get an email with all these resources as well. So don't feel like you've got to quickly get all these links. But I did want to point out our budget tracker, which Keith mentioned earlier. We are tracking when county commissions will have public hearings on their budgets. And so that is what that's for. And that's to help you plan when you need to go to those commission meetings to speak. And I can tell you just a week from tonight, there are budget public hearings for Wake, Harnett, Union, and Robeson on Monday, May 20th. So those are already coming up. So that's another resource. A third resource we have for you is a directory of your county commission's website and meeting information. And this has contact information for county commissioners across the state. So you can contact them directly, even if you can't go to the public hearing. You can still send an email or call them and express any concerns that you have. So there's that. We have a fourth resource that is all about helping you in contacting local officials. So just some tips and tricks, essentially, and also some tips on giving public comments, things to that you may want to point out. And then the last couple of resources we have are a report that we shared last year from the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, and the Harvard Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. And this is a report, and we referenced it earlier in some quotes, but it has some stories from election officials in the past and how they've been affected by funding and specifically how certain counties have been affected. And we have a resource from our partners at the Budget and Tax Center that these are economic county snapshots for, they have one for each county in North Carolina. So you can see how your county compares on a number of different metrics as these commissions are determining their budget. So even beyond elections, I think that can be really insightful. So we'll send these resources via email following tonight's training. And you can find the most of these at the link that I talked about earlier. That's dimnc.co /elections advocacy. And yes, and you can see it there in the chat. And so we're going to move on now to our next steps. And you can see, if we go to the next slide. This is showing you the reporting forms. They're both for Common Cause and Democracy in North Carolina. And those of you that have been monitoring, I think are already familiar with these. But you can see them there. So when you're going to County Board of Elections meetings, or you're going to county commission meetings to advocate, then we would ask that you send in reports via those links. And we get together on a weekly basis, and we review these reports, and it helps us in our advocacy, and also determining which where there are counties that need our support the most. I believe I'm going to turn it to Keith if you have anything more to share on this.
Yeah, I'll just highlight that right side of the slide. Feel free to share any funding concerns with your lawmakers. I think it's a good practice to break down some of those silos, because some lawmakers just don't know what your Board of Elections does. I mean, it happens at the county level where county commissioners may not be too familiar with what a Board of Elections does. But if you have any funding concerns, you can share that with your lawmakers, and then also urge them to advocate for stronger funding for your Board of Elections. And I will drop the link again in the chat for how you can find your legislator and their contact information.
All right. Thank you, Keith. And we have now come to the question and answer part of the evening. So I know some people have been asking questions in the chat, and there have been some people already answering those, but I know we have covered a lot of information. So please let us know any questions that you have. Feel free to add them to the Q&A, the Q&A section on your screen, or you can also raise your hand and we will answer all of your questions. And I see Kathleen, your hand is raised. Go ahead. Kathleen, if you are talking, we can't hear you. You're still muted if you're talking, Kathleen.
I'll just jump in while we're waiting for Kathleen. There were a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I just wanted to make sure everyone knows that if you're looking for data on how much a county spends per voter, or how much they spent per voter in 2020 to compare with the spending this year proposed, that is in the resources that we shared. If you have any trouble locating the one-page resource for your county, the fact sheet, feel free to reach out to any of us. And we are glad to make sure to get that to you.
Okay. Kathleen, we may have to follow up with you afterwards, and or if you're able to put your question in the chat, please do. Are there any other questions?
I'll lift up another one that we received a little bit earlier. And I see we did answer this in the chat, but a couple of folks are lifting this up, so I'll just name it. But the question was how to ensure our legislature is being funded adequately. So the State Board of Elections is funded by our state legislature, whereas we're doing advocacy at the county level with county commissioners for CBOE funding. But it is still worthwhile, as Jane was putting in the chat, to talk to lawmakers about funding issues that are happening at the county level so they can better understand how the state board can provide those county board of elections members with assistance. The state board, for instance, will deploy regional support staff to counties that might only have one election specialist or director, and that's funding that does have to come through our state legislature. So advocacy at both levels is really helpful, but we think you'll have a lot more impact talking to those county commissioners as those meetings are coming up.
Thank you, Carol. Any other questions in the chat that we may have missed? Or anyone's have outstanding questions? Caitlin, go ahead.
Yeah, Tyler, I have a question. What happens if I'm not able, if an advocate on the call misses maybe an election budget meeting or isn't able to attend a county commissioner meeting? Is it still helpful to advocate after the fact for election funding?
Yes. So one of the things I had mentioned before is that even if you can't go to the commission meetings, you can still contact your commissioners via email or calling them, and we have that resource that has their contact information. So I would certainly encourage you to contact them that way if you can't make it to the meeting. And even after the public hearing, that is just the public hearing. They typically do not vote on the budget during that meeting. They'll typically have another meeting where they vote on the budget. So there will still be time after that public hearing to provide comments. And that sometimes during those public hearings, the county manager may give a presentation on the budget for the public to provide feedback on. So yes, please don't be discouraged if you miss that public hearing. All right, and Jane is absolutely right. Letters to the editor can help too. And I'll just point out, Carol had mentioned our legislators can also talk to their county commissioners. So and that may have some weight. So encourage them to talk to their commissioners about why it's important. All right. Well, not seeing any additional questions. One more time, any questions? Going once? Twice? Oh, okay. Ellen, go ahead.
Hey there. I had just typed in the Q&A. Do our do our state's political parties weigh in on this? You know, the Republicans, Democrats, Libertarian. Is this somehow seen as a partisan issue? I mean, why isn't everybody? It just surprises me that this is, these sponsors of this. So I'm just curious. I'm clueless, so I have a lot to learn. So what's what up?
That's a good
Take a shot at
question.
that, Tyler,
Go
if
ahead,
you
Ann.
want. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that this is indicative of is how much we have put the infrastructure of elections on the local level. I think if we really wanted to make sure that elections were funded fully, there would be more state funding for running elections, and I think there would also probably be more federal funding for running elections. And so this is the result, right? We have counties, some of which have quite small budgets and have other pressing priorities. And we're asking them to cover the full cost of what is a quite complex and critical infrastructure to our democracy. And so that I think that's what we're seeing here. And I won't comment on the partisan or nonpartisan aspect of it. I think it's an entirely nonpartisan issue. And certainly this call is entirely nonpartisan. But I would say that there is a structural question there about where the funding should be coming from for our elections. And right now it's mostly coming from the local level.
Okay. Oh.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm talking away here. Thank you, Ellen, for that question. That was a good question. And let me see. Is there a question about municipal funding?
Yes, I can.
Ellen has another question, I think.
Oh, you have another one, Ellen? Or are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just saying I'm registered unaffiliated, so I don't have like a party meeting that I go to, but I just wondered, why isn't everyone going to their meetings and going, why aren't we talking about this? Again, you can show I'm clueless. Okay, I'll stop now.
Yeah, you're pointing out. I mean, everyone should be. So, I think that you're pointing out something important there. But Carol, what were you saying about municipal funding?
Yeah, so Pam, you raised a great question in the chat earlier that I think a couple of folks asked, which was how to increase access for municipal elections pertaining to funding. And Caitlin, I might actually pass it to you, but I think this is an important one to answer here because there is a difference. And many people don't know this. Municipal elections are determined differently. So, Caitlin, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. And I know that we are at 7:17, so I want to be mindful of our time. But in terms of municipal funding, so when we think of municipal elections, those are actually funded by the municipality itself. And so what ends up happening is if there is a municipal election, the municipality will determine how much money it needs to spend on that election. And you may know, or you may not know that your municipality also determines whether or not you'll have early voting and voting by mail. And so some municipalities do not have early voting or voting by mail in order to save money. And so those decisions, if you realize in your municipality that you don't have that, that is an opportunity for you to advocate to your municipal, so your city or town council, as well as your county board of elections, as to why those options are important to your community. And so what will end up happening is your municipality will talk to your county boards of elections, and then the county boards will ultimately give your municipality bill as to how much that election cost the county boards to implement. And I will turn it back over. I also see that Jane has her hand up, and as well as Ellen.
Go ahead, Jane.
This is beyond my pay grade, but someone asked if we know how many other states require counties or localities to fund elections versus the state funding elections. So I'm hoping somebody knows that information.
I can just quickly say, unless someone has more deeper insight, I don't know the exact breakdown, but some states have a more centralized state system, but all states do have some burden on the local areas, is my understanding.
For attending tonight's election funding advocacy training for this fiscal year 2024 to 2025, sponsored by North Carolina Black Alliance, the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center, Common Cause, North Carolina Democracy, North Carolina, and the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. And as I said, we will be sending you all the resources and links that we shared tonight, and including a copy of the recording. So don't feel that as though you need to scramble to get all these links, because I know we shared a lot with you. And thank you all so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.